So, good morning, everyone. Officially, welcome to Friday before the long weekend. So, keep in mind that there's no school on Monday, so there's no class, so you can sleep in and do whatever you want for Monday, um, which is nice, right? Because sometimes we get a long weekend too early in the term, and then you can't really enjoy it. Like, you don't want a long weekend in the first week of term. That's a total waste. But now we're like, we're week 5 or 6, so we're ready for it. We can really enjoy it. So let's see who's here. So Kevin's here. Good morning, Kevin. And Ananda's here. Good morning to you. And Ayushi is here. Good morning. And Michaela's here. Good morning, Michaela. And Shania. Good morning, Shania. And Hadil's here. Good morning to you. And Mike is here. Good morning. And Ryan is here. Good morning. Good evening, I should say, to you. Okay, so what were we doing yesterday? Oh yeah, I remember. We were talking about Nazi propaganda, right? And we said that propaganda is kind of an important tool for governments. It's a bit of a dishonest tool, though, right? Who's messaging me like crazy? Oh, secondary teachers. So we were talking about propaganda. It's an effective tool that governments use. It's a bit of a dishonest tool, though. Even in its sort of more innocent forms, the government is trying to convince the people to see something a certain way, or to have certain views or feel certain things about certain events or people or aspects of the country. And so you can have sort of light forms of propaganda, which are kind of, very patriotic and, meant to inspire people to love their country and support their government. And then, of course, you can see some pretty dark stuff as well, right? And we said that Hitler was a master of propaganda and used it actively to try to convince the citizens of Germany to see things the way he saw them, and to believe what he wanted them to believe, right? And so, again, he felt that he was offering, as you can see from this quote, you can see he felt he was offering superior leadership, and he just had to convince everyone that he was right. And so we looked through a few of these yesterday. Again, some fairly innocent ones, right? This is it's a friendly young girl collecting for a youth charity or a youth hostel, and I think the message we said that it sends is that it makes the Nazi party seem nice, right? They're nice, they're compassionate. The Hitler youth here are doing things for the community. They're good, upstanding, wholesome, moral German kids, right? And again, they were, but the purpose of the Hitler youth was a little bit more sinister, right? In terms of spreading Hitler's ideology amongst young people, right? So again, this kind of legitimizes it and makes us feel good about the Hitler youth, right? We saw this one here again, another student, another strapping young man saying that students fight for the Fuhrer and for the people. And so again, we said we have some images of, sort of pride and strength and honor and sort of fighting for your country. All of those things are kind of wrapped up in this image, right? And so, the idea is that you too can be this handsome and, strong and dashing if you fight for the Fuhrer as well, right? This one we had a little more fun with, I think, but it's a dramatic image, but there's a lot of meaning here, right? And Hitler's using some very carefully constructed imagery to transmit his message. And what did we kind of say the message was? What are German people supposed to learn from looking at this image? You have to speak up through the mask. I'm sorry. God is with us, okay. Right? And how do we know God is there? Yeah, the sort of lights shining down from heaven. Of course, we sometimes see that naturally, but here it seems to be shining on Hitler himself, right? What else might we be meant to understand from this image? What else might we be meant to understand, or learn, or know, or believe? Right. So all of Germany is united behind Hitler, which may or may not have been the case. Certainly, lots of people were, but it's definitely meant to look like that. What else? What else? What else? What else, people? So God's shining down on us. Hitler is leading the people. What's the look on his face like?
Determined.
Yeah, he looks very determined, very serious, kind of strong too, right? He's got the Nazi flag in one hand. What's his other hand doing? He's like, yeah, he's serious, right? He's determined. He's leading the people, and of course, God himself seems to be shining down on Hitler. Do you think Hitler believes in God? Probably not. Fascist states usually aren't religious. And if they are, religion is kind of a tool to control the people. It's not. So I doubt he was. Well, no, he actually wasn't, because what did he say in the film? He said something that priests, they spread inconsistent dogmas, right? So inconsistent ideas or things that people had to believe, and so he was furious when he even saw a priest. So yeah, I don't think he's that religious, but some Germans are, right? So he's going to use that imagery to convince the people of who he is. We saw this one yesterday too, right? The eagle, the Nazi eagle, who is looking after German families, right? And so this fierce protective eagle is standing over this simple German family, right? So we're meant to understand that. And then we saw some more kind of sinister examples of propaganda, right? And so we said in this one here, there's something written in German here saying behind the enemy powers, the Jews, but you don't even need to read that to know what's going on here, right? The symbolism is quite clear, and so you don't even have to be literate. You don't even have to know how to read, and Hitler is going to communicate his idea to you, right? And so here, of course, we have the flags of 3 enemy nations of Germany, and behind them all is this kind of sinister, suspicious-looking Jewish person, right? And of course, we know he's a Jewish person because he's got that Star of David on his kind of watch chain thing.
It's like there's an ugly face behind them.
Yeah, there's an ugly face behind there, and and that's who it belongs to, right? And of course, there's no truth to that. Jewish people do not run these 3 countries or control them in any way. But of course, that was what Hitler's propaganda did, and we heard him say that in the film, right? A useful thing to do is to take a bunch of perceived enemies of the country and combine them into one, somehow convince the people that they are the same enemy, right? And you can see him doing that right here, right? These 3 different countries who aren't even allied with each other, really. The Soviet Union is not allied with the US, but here we have them all lumped together and connected with the Jewish people, right? And so Hitler's working to take all of Germany's enemies and make the people feel as if it's just one, right? Just one enemy. Saw this one yesterday for a documentary film, believe it or not, called The Eternal Jew, right? And I said that this is kind of an important thing, and I'll show you a couple more images too, is that, one of the things I argued is, and you may disagree with me on this because humans seem to be quite good at it, but in many cases it's very difficult for human beings to kill other human beings. And so if you want to get humans to kill other humans, you have to somehow dehumanize the other group. You have to make them seem as if they are not entirely human, right? And so lots of times, good morning, lots of times in war propaganda, you will see the enemy portrayed in ways that kind of dehumanize them, right? So you don't want to send your soldiers into war thinking that the soldiers on the other side are just like they are, with wives and girlfriends and lives. You don't want your soldiers to think that, because then they'll be sympathetic toward them, right? So you want the enemy soldiers to seem monstrous or disgusting or awful in some way. And so you can see that happening here, right? The eternal Jew in this image is kind of barely human, right? This is kind of a gargoyle-like monstrous face that is, you know, human-ish, but you don't see many humans that look quite like that, right? He kind of looks more like a devil, right? And he's eternal, right? And so what's it mean to be eternal? What are they saying when they say the eternal Jew? It's like he never dies, right? So he's like this mythical, like a vampire almost kind of thing, right? That they never die. And so here, this propaganda image has dehumanized Jews in two ways, right? It's made them seem non-human, but actually like in a way more than human, right? Something that's frightening because of their power, right? Like a werewolf or a vampire or something like that. Same thing with this one here, and I don't have a translation for what the German is, unfortunately, but I'm not so sure that we need the translation. What do you see here? Right, so there's this thing eating people, and who is this thing meant to represent? Right, because he's got the Star of David on his forehead, right? But again, does this look like a human person? Not really, right? Pointy ears. He's got fangs in his mouth. It's kind of this like almost an ogre or a troll-like creature that is devouring these poor German people, right? What else do you see in this image? There's a couple of symbols. There's a Star of David, so that indicates that this is meant to represent the Jews or Jewish people. But there's a couple of other images too. Can you see them? The one on the left? Yeah, what's that one? Do you know what that symbol is? I think that is the symbol for the Masons. And so the Masons are kind of a secret society that existed in Europe and North America. And so Hitler is trying to associate the Jewish people with this secret society, the Masons. What about on this guy's, on the right side there? What do you see? Good morning. What's that? Yeah, you see the hammer and the sickle, right, which is the symbol for the Soviet Union. So here we see Hitler again combining enemies, right? He's combining this secret society, the Masons, which people might be apprehensive about. He's combining the Jewish people. He's combining the Bolsheviks, right, the communists in the Soviet Union, and all of them are conspiring to destroy the German people. And here we have this ogre-like creature chowing down on these poor, innocent people, right? A powerful image, right?
Where's the Soviet?
What's that?
The Soviet mark, you said?
Yeah, do you see it on the right there? I'm not sure how clearly it's coming through on the screen. I can see it pretty clearly, just on his, like,
On the left.
on the right. Yeah, so the mace, I think that's the Masonic symbol for the Masons on the left, and the hammer and the sickle on the right. Like, yeah, it's a little bit faint in this image, but yeah, so powerful symbols, and again, you see Hitler combining enemies into one, right? So here we go again, right, with the dehumanization of people. So what are these Jewish people being compared to? Lice, right? What are lice? Yeah, those tiny little insects, and sometimes, you know, they start nesting in your hair and laying eggs, and it's really gross, and you have to pick them out one by one and use special shampoo. Sometimes it spreads around schools a lot because young kids are, you know, touching each other all over the place. But yeah, so here we have the Jewish people associated with, or kind of symbolized by, a pest, right? An insect, a parasite. And again, that's a red flag too, right? When you see people dehumanized and when you see them compared with things that are vermin, that are pests, right? So when certain groups of people are called lice or rats or termites or whatever, some sort of pest that you might want to exterminate from your house, when you see groups of people associated with those things, big red flag, right? And as we'll talk about a little bit later, this is one of the earliest steps of genocide, where one group of people dehumanizes the other one and makes them seem like they are not human. And here you can see it pretty well. We've got this kind of big picture of a louse. Lice are kind of gross, right? You don't want insects living in your hair, like ew, right? Yeah, Aliana's squirming in her chair, and yeah, it's gross. And so you take that feeling, right? That feeling like, ugh, you take that feeling, and then here he is connecting it to the Jewish people, right? And so they're almost equated with, you know, disease and pestilence and, you know, stuff you don't want around you, right? And so, again, it's very clearly done here. So I was going to have you read this, but I don't think I will, because I think we're kind of past it. But if you look at the Nazi Party platform, and so what's a platform? What's a platform? It's like a what? Kind of like a stage, yeah. So a platform can be a flat surface, right? And and on a stage, what do? Well, you get up and talk or sing or dance if you're inclined that way. But that's kind of where the word comes from, right? Is that you would, in the past, you would get up on a platform, you would get up on a stage, and you would say, if you elect me, here's what I'm going to do, right? And so we kind of still use that word today for a party's platform, right? So the platform is, if you elect them, what are they going to do, right? What is their plan? What is their approach? So we still use that word. And so here, you can see we have the Nazi Party platform, and it's drafted in 1920. And again, you see all of this stuff in there from the beginning, right? So again, Hitler doesn't spring this stuff on people later on. It is there all the way from the beginning. The idea that Germany is only for people of German blood, and that, you know, other ethnicities, particularly the Jewish people, have no place in the Nazi Party or in Germany, right? And so, again, there's about 15 or 20 points in the party platform. It's pretty simple to read, but you can clearly see how there's going to be different ethnicities or races are going to be given different rights in Nazi Germany. And again, it's there from the very beginning. There's no surprise, right? Hitler doesn't become someone different when he gets into power. He's always the same guy. Okay, so that leads us to right onto the cusp of the Second World War, okay? And so We said that some things were happening in Germany at the time. We saw in the video that Hitler moved into the Rhineland to take it back for Germany, but also kind of to see what anyone else would do, right? And we saw in the video, he said those were the 48 hours after invading the Rhineland were, the most tense of his life, right? Because he rolled in, he violated the Treaty of Versailles, and he waited to see what would the response would be. What would people do? And what did they do? Nothing. Whew. Phew. That was a close one, right? So then what does he do? Right, unites Germany with Austria, right? And then waits to see what people do. And what do they do? Nothing, right? And what does he do next? Right, he rolls into Czechoslovakia, right? The Sudetenland, which is the sort of ring-shaped area that's right next to Germany. And he rolls in and takes it over. And what do people do about it? Yeah, so they do have a little peace treaty afterwards, and famously, British Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain says it's peace in our time. Haha, ridiculous. But anyway, they think they've solved the problem, right? And every time Hitler does this, he's like, oh, now that Germany finally has the Rhineland / Austria / the Sudetenland, now that we finally have this thing, now we can settle and have peace, right? But of course, we know that that's not at all the plan. He's just snowing these guys, right? He's just telling them a lie, an outright lie, and he has no interest in following through. And so again, we had maybe a little discussion yesterday on the sort of hindsight of that, right? So it would be tempting and easy for us to look back at these events and say, well, Britain and France really blew it. They had a chance to intervene before Hitler got too strong, but they didn't take it. They kind of wimped out. They let him get away with it. They appeased him, right? And of course, in retrospect, looking back, it's very easy to say that because lots of bad things happened. But at the time, it might not have been so clear, or people might not have been in the position to intervene anyway. And so I tried to, I don't know about successfully or unsuccessfully, but I tried to make a connection with other instances in kind of the modern world here where we have a similar breaking of rules and yet nobody did anything about it. And so what would govern our response, right? Should we be intervening now before things get out of hand? Or should we let it go because maybe it's not worth it, right? And how do we make a good decision on what's worth it and what's not? And I don't know if we came to any conclusion on those topics. Every situation is probably different, but again, I wanted to highlight the point that it's very easy to look back on history and say, well, of course, they should have known, and I think I've been kind of making that point, is that they should have known, but also sometimes you don't know at the time what will happen in the future, right? And so Britain and France may have thought that indeed they didn't want to pick a fight with Hitler. If he just takes the Rhineland, it's not a big deal. Who cares? It belonged to Germany anyway. Let's not start an international incident over it, right? But again, we know that was coming anyway. But it'll be interesting to look back on this period of history and see if there were places where some countries could have intervened with other countries, but then things got out of hand later, maybe. Okay, Spanish Civil War. I want to talk about it really quickly. I want to talk about it quickly because it does play a certain role in the beginning of the Second World War. But I want to only deal with it quickly because it's kind of complicated. There's a lot of different groups involved, and so if we were to dig into it in detail, it would actually take some time because it's a complicated situation. And so what I'll do is I have a little video for us to watch. And so the video has way too much information, and I probably wouldn't ask you very much from it, but the video does do a good job of giving us the 10-minute version on the Spanish Civil War, and then we can kind of get into the run-up to World War II. So again, I don't want to just skip over the Spanish Civil War, but I also don't want to completely ignore it either. So hopefully this video will help us deal with it without going too deep, okay? So hang on one second here. For online people, I'm going to good. For online people, I'm just going to put the link into Microsoft Teams, which I've done. And so I'll give you about 12 minutes to watch the video, and then after 12 minutes we'll come back here and we'll continue on, okay? So I'm just going to put 12 minutes on the clock, and then online people will see you back here in 12. Okay, and we're back. So as you can see from the video, there's a whole ton of stuff going on. It's confusing and crazy, and there's a civil war and a civil war within a civil war, and we don't need to dig into it that deeply, okay? So what I would like you to remember from the Spanish Civil War is kind of what's happening is it's a transition between government systems, right? So Spain starts off with a monarchy, and then they want to transition to something else, right? Maybe a constitutional republic, a constitutional democracy. But not everyone agrees on exactly how the country should be run, right? And so in an attempt to transition from monarchy to democracy, things kind of fall apart, right? There's people on the right side who want sort of more authoritarian control, or they don't want to lose the monarchy. And then there's people on the left side who want democracy and liberalism and all kinds of things, right? And so these two sides are pretty far apart in terms of their vision for Spain. And unfortunately, the government doesn't handle the transition very well, right? We see that the government that's in power has some really left-wing ideas, and they try to institute them. The right wing gets freaked out by this sort of pace of change, because we know people on the right are very conservative and like things to kind of remain traditional and the same. And the conflict grows to a point where they arm themselves and everybody starts fighting with everyone else, right? And so we see kind of two sides appear, right? We've got these nationalists kind of allied with fascists and monarchists, and Catholics and Carlists, if you know what those are, and Phalangists. So we've got all of these kind of strange groups of people who are allied together because they share some sort of interest, right? And Francisco Franco will lead those. And then on the other side, we've got people who are more on the left wing, right? We've got people who are Democrats and Republicans, not Republicans like the US, but people who are interested in democracy, but who interestingly are allied with anarchists who want like anarchy. And then we have them allied with communists as well. And of course, communism and democracy don't really mix very well either. But in this case, they are opposing the nationalists, right? Francisco Franco's right-wing nationalists. And so they kind of ally together, but they're not kind of natural partners, and they continue to sort of struggle with each other and fight each other. So it's a very bloody battle. It's a very long, drawn-out war. And again, everyone's kind of fighting with everyone else until 1939, when Francisco Franco's nationalists kind of win the war, and Spain remains a dictatorship, right? A fascist dictatorship until 1975, right? For our purposes, the Spanish Civil War in terms of World War II is a bit of a training ground for Germany and for Italy, right? So Hitler gets to send some war supplies and some volunteers. He gets to test out his air force in Spain. The Italians get to participate as well. And so it's a bit of a testing training ground for Nazi Germany and for fascist Italy, right? So they get a little bit of, practice war experience before the big conflict that they're about to engage in. But again, who's not there? Right, the British and the French, again, don't get involved, right? They decide that, we don't want to get involved in this internal civil war in Spain. We're just going to stay out of it, right? And so, again, they stay out, but that makes them a little less ready to deal with the Nazis, later that year, really, right? Because Hitler is going to roll into Poland in September of 1939, and Britain and France are finally going to decide to intervene, right? They're finally going to they're going to have to do something, and so they do. Yeah, so that's kind of all I want you to know about the Spanish Civil War, is that it's kind of a war between the left and right. but there's a lot of different groups that are allied fighting each other. Other countries participate as well, like Germany, who's supporting the right-wing nationalists, and Italy. The Soviet Union starts supporting the left-wing communists and Democrats as well. It all ends with the nationalists or the fascists winning, but again, Britain and France lose maybe an opportunity to become involved and start building up their military. But again, they sit this one out, and so a little bit later in that year when Hitler invades Poland, the Allies, Britain and France, aren't quite ready to go yet. And so they have a lot of work to do to catch up. And of course, as we saw from the video, Hitler's been arming Germany for quite some time, and he's ready to rock and roll, right? And these other countries are not ready. Okay, break time? No? Not yet? This is the first time I've ever asked you if you wanted a break, and you said no. It is a little early. Okay. Okay, I've got some reading for you to do. You'll regret that, hey? I've got some reading for you to do here. Although, I don't think I posted that online. So I'll give you some time to do some reading and answer these questions. For online people, I will post these online in just 1 minute. I just have to actually do that. What's that? Oh, sorry. You can't see that. Oh yeah, you can't see that. All right.
But just a question, a bit off topic. So far, I'm sure monarchy had the reform, like was destroyed, was replaced with a constitutional monarchy. We saw a lot of bloodshed, a lot of deaths, a lot of civil war. How did the British come up?
How did the British get from
Monarchy
to a constitutional one? That's a good question. I do not know. Yeah, I don't know the answer to that. And the French have a revolution.
Oh yeah.
We know that.
A lot of guillotine.
Yeah, a lot of people get their heads cut off there. Yeah, I don't know how Britain gets from a monarchy to a constitutional monarchy. Good question. Okay, online people, I'll post this in Microsoft Teams in just 2 minutes. Sit tight. Okay, online people, you should, the section of the book you need should be posted now, so sorry about the delay there. Okay, we'll just take a 10-minute break, people, and then we'll come back, okay? Okay, people. So we're back from break now, and let's just read for 8 more minutes, and then we'll talk about some of these. Okay. Okay, good people. So lots of reading. Sorry about that. That's okay though. We'll make our way through it. There's a lot of things happening here. Obviously, World War II has begun, right? And so we saw Hitler do a few things like invade the Rhineland and reunite with Austria and take parts of Czechoslovakia and then take the rest of Czechoslovakia, and no response from the French or the British, right? The Nazis were involved in the Spanish Civil War and they got some practice with their Luftwaffe. What's a Luftwaffe? Oh, good. I thought somebody was going to say it's a Belgian waffle maker, but it's not. It's the German Air Force, which is not as good as a waffle maker, but that's okay. So, yeah, so both of those countries, the Italians and the Germans, get some practice in the Spanish Civil War, and then Hitler moves into Poland, right? And so I don't think it's mentioned here, it's kind of alluded to, but the Germans and the Soviets have a non-aggression pact, right? And so they both agree, Joseph Stalin in the Soviet Union and Hitler in Germany, they agree they're not going to attack each other, and they also agree to split Poland between them, right? And so in 1939, Hitler rolls into his half of Poland and takes it over. Stalin rolls into the other half of Poland and takes it and goes on to conquer Latvia, Lithuania, Estonia, and tries to conquer Finland. And so things are all of a sudden happening, right? So the British and the French have been kind of hoping nothing would happen and maybe sticking their head in the sand a little bit, but clearly stuff is getting real at this point, right? So I think I may have just answered this question, but what Soviet action does cause concern among Western nations in 1939 and 40, and why? Anybody? Bueller? You guys don't get that reference, I know. What did they do, the Soviets, that was so concerning? They got into a pact with the Nazis.
They blew up the eastern half of Europe, and it was concerning because they blew it up, and they weren't going to fight the Nazis. So this time Germany was only fighting on one front. It was bad.
Yeah, so that German-Soviet non-aggression pact is very useful for Hitler, right? Because we know that in World War I, Germany had the difficult situation of being stuck between two of its enemies, right? It had France on the one side and it had Russia on the other. So Hitler doesn't really want to make that mistake again, and so he makes peace with the Soviets, so he doesn't have to worry about dealing with them, and he just has to worry about the French, right? And Ahmad is kind of smirking because he knows that Hitler is going to stab Stalin in the back, but that's okay.
The Schlieffen plan all over again.
In a way, but more competently executed, right? So, but of course, for the Western powers, they got a little freaked out, right? Because I keep messing that up. Britain and France are kind of looking at Germany and they're like, okay, we're getting nervous. What's this Hitler doing over there? Why is he building all of these warplanes and tanks? And then, out of nowhere, suddenly the Soviet Union rolls in and takes out half of Poland, right? And so now Western powers are thinking, oh gosh, do we have two? Do we have two problems now? We thought we just had one. We thought we had this Hitler guy that we're going to have to deal with. Now we have Stalin rolling in and taking over parts of Europe too. This is cause for panic, people, right? We thought we had one concerning issue. Now we have two big concerning issues.
One question, not so sure. Did the Allies, like the French and British, actually knew that the Germans were building up tanks and planes? Because one thing that I've heard, I was in the documentary, it says that the Germans did make all this stuff, and
Mhm.
And some of the reports, the tanks were tractor, and the planes were just for agriculture. Is that right?
It's possible. It's possible that I don't know for sure. I think it's plausible that they had to send reports to the Allies. I think it's very plausible that they lied in those reports. But I also think it's very plausible to suggest that the British probably had spies in Germany at that point, right? They had OSS and things like that, and so there was probably people in Germany spying on the Germans. And I think, based on what the documentary was telling us yesterday, in the later stages of, like, into the 1930s, Hitler was pretty open about displaying his military openly. And so maybe initially he kept it under the radar, but I think later on it was clear to see. And I'm almost positive the British would have had spies in Germany. I don't know if it was MI5 at that time, or was it MI5? Yeah. Oh. Yeah, so they would have had MI5 or OSS agents stationed in Germany spying on them. So I think they would have known. But again, they do, for whatever reason, they choose to do nothing. But we also hear that, the German or the British public is not really that interested in getting involved in conflict, right? There's a pretty strong peace movement not to get involved. And again, the memory of the First World War is still very fresh, right? People have, if not parents, then grandparents who fought in that war and died in that war. And so the memory of it is not a distant one, right? It's very fresh. Okay, why is the first part of the war called the Phony War? So Britain and France, I think, declare war on Germany in early September 3rd, something like that. But really, no actual battles get fought between Britain, France, and Germany until May of 1940. So they call this initial period the Phony War, right? What's phony? Does anyone know what phony is? It's what? It's fake, yeah. It's an old slang. Nobody uses phony anymore, right? It's that slang word has kind of moved out of people's use. But once upon a time, people used phony as a slang word for fake, right? So it's the fake war. No fighting is happening, even though technically they're at war. Ooh, okay. Last question for you. It's a bit of a big one, but this is the last one. The fall of France. So that doesn't take long, right? The war just starts and France is out of it immediately. What happened?
They were bad.
They were bad. But what happened? This is a little embarrassing, but what happened for France?
So they had this Maginot.
Ooh, what's the Maginot Line?
Stupid long for between wait.
It's what?
Okay, so it was a stupid long forward between on the French and the German border that the French didn't fortify some part of it, which was on a would cover a forest.
Mm.
They was thought that that's impossible for any tanks to move through. The Panzer IIIs they moved all the way through and they flanked the Maginot Line so it collapsed. Then they drew a line between the forces. They divided the French and English forces. And then Dunkirk happened, and then the French fell. The French.
Yeah, so pretty disastrous for France, right? And it happens quickly. The French build this huge sort of fortification wall between France and Germany. It's got all kinds of bunkers and big guns and underground tunnels to supply the people in the bunkers shooting the guns. But they leave a section undefended because they figure, oh, there's too many trees there. The tanks will never go through. But the Germans run their tanks through there anyway. And so this massive fortification is useless because there's this open section in the middle that the Germans go right through, right? And they make their way 500 kilometers into France almost immediately. They arrive in Paris, the French surrender, and it's all over for France pretty quickly, right? And of course, they mention in the text Dunkirk. Has anyone seen the movie, the Christopher Nolan movie Dunkirk? Yeah, what was it like?
It was a nice movie.
Nice movie, well done.
Yeah. The content may be a bit not good, but it was nice.
I heard that, and again, I only heard a couple of reviews, but I heard there was a couple of people who are still alive who were at Dunkirk, and they saw the movie and they're like, yeah, that's kind of what it was like being there. So apparently it was a reasonably realistic version of what happened. But yeah, if you see the movie, it's this, the evacuation of all of these soldiers who are kind of cut off by Germany's advance into France, and basically everybody with a boat helps to evacuate all of these soldiers, which is a bit of a miscalculation for Germany, but exciting move, made for an exciting movie, right? Okay, so that is all I have for you today. I would like to have a quiz maybe next week, maybe like Thursday next week. What do you think about that? Well, I know what you think about that, but we'll aim for a quiz on Thursday, okay? Yeah. It'll probably be, we did 1 to 10, so it'll probably be like 11 to 20. Classes 11 to 20. Today is class 22-ish or so. 22 or, huh? Yeah, 11 to 20. So I'll post it in Microsoft Teams, but I just wanted to give you a quick heads up before I let you go. But okay, so that's all I have for you today. Good work, all of you, and I will see you on Tuesday, not on Monday. Tuesday. Have a good long weekend. That's it. Yay. Okay. See you.